helping your child eat enough, helping your child be relaxed about food, helping your child not be fearful of food. Those things have to be at the base of all of nutrition.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. This is the third of 4 episodes in Talking About Kids' series on eating disorders. In the first episode, Bryn Austin described the prevalence and stigmas of eating disorders. In the second episode, Jean Doak explained the harm caused by them. In this third episode, we examine how to prevent eating disorders or intervene when issues manifest. My guest to provide her expert insights on these topics is Anna Lutz. Anna has a distinguished history as a dietitian and eating disorder specialist. She is co-owner of Lutz and Alexander Nutrition Therapy, which focuses on eating disorders and pediatric and family nutrition. And she is the co-creator of Sunny Side Up Nutrition, which is a website and podcast that assists parents in feeding their kids successfully. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. With her caseload, her podcast, and her schedule as an in-demand trainer and presenter, Anna Lutz is very busy. She took the time to come on Talking About Kids to get the word out about research and resources that benefit kids. You can do your part by liking this podcast and sharing this series with your friends and professional network. And now, the interview. I first became interested in eating disorders when I was in college. I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm sure I knew people with eating disorders, but I didn't know anything about eating disorders. I didn't know that people I knew had eating disorders. And I went to college and I was looking around and people were eating in all different ways. It was the 90s when people were avoiding any kind of fat in their food. People were eating bagels, with nothing on them. And I became just interested in what influences how we eat, what influences what we eat, and the complexities of that. I studied psychology at Duke and then decided during my time there that I wanted to be a dietitian and work specifically with people with eating disorders. And so I went on to study that later. You know, we're in the third episode in this series, and we've already heard that the language around these issues, the language around, body image and eating, and even the language we use to describe disorders is really, really important. And I want to talk about what we consider to be healthy eating habits, if we can even use that term healthy, and where those habits originate.
It's such a good question, and I don't want to shy away from the word healthy. I want to acknowledge that it's a bit of a loaded term in our society because I think oftentimes we use the word healthy and people have assumptions of what that means. So when I really think about healthy eating, as a dietitian, I do think about what we eat, but I also think about how we feel about what we eat, or how the emotions that come up with when we eat or don't eat certain things, or the connections I might have with people when I eat certain foods. that health is really, really multifaceted. And when we just kind of narrow it down to it's only about the nutrients in our food, for a lot of people, that actually becomes quite unhealthy because of the stress and emotions that get wrapped up in what they eat.
Okay, so again, let's unpack that a little bit. If I'm hearing you correctly, then even if you might be eating something that has been maybe labeled as healthy, but because of how it's making you feel when you're eating it, it might be unhealthy for you. Did I hear that correctly?
It could be. I mean, that's just one example of if I only feel like I should eat a certain type of food, and
Hmm.
I'm spending all my time worrying and extremely distraught about making sure I'm eating only certain types of food, that's going to have, our emotions have a toll on our physical body and certainly on our mind. It also, if we're not eating enough food because we're only allowing ourselves certain foods, um, that has a physical effect on us.
Mm.
Um, or if we're avoiding social connection, um, because of how or what we're eating, that certainly has an effect on our um, physical well being. We could probably go on and on with examples like that.
Yeah, well, and I want to because this being talking about kids, obviously we're trying to create the optimum experience for kids. But in hearing you talk and hearing the previous guests talk as well, the adults have a lot of work to do on we have a lot of work to do on our own behaviors before we can create a positive experience for the kids. And so let's talk about both. So um you mentioned that, like, sometimes healthy eating prevents us from connecting with other people. I'm glad you brought that up because I had been thinking about that a lot in previous, episodes about how food can be used, as a way to celebrate and bring people together, but it's never like, but these are like cakes and pies, and or maybe they don't have to be. Anna, you do a lot of work coaching families about this particular thing. So what do you tell them about celebrations, about family gatherings, about holidays like we have coming up here?
Well, we really talk about that food in all cultures plays a really integral part of celebration and with connecting with people. And if we, I think if we try to take foods out of that,
Mm.
we're losing we're losing that essence of what the celebration is. We're losing the connection, and that there is a lot of health and well-being in in connecting with um, people around you, people in your family, people in communities, and food is an integral part of that. And so, if we try to eliminate that and say, okay, these are quote unquote bad foods and we shouldn't be eating them, we're losing this very important part of who we are as humans.
So when we think about our children who are just now creating their habits and their thoughts and their views and feelings, as you pointed out, about what they're eating, how do we begin to create that experience so that they can maintain those connections? I mean, listeners of talking about kids know that it all comes back to connections, that building block of resilience, those healthy relationships. So we want to eat in a way that preserves relationships and maybe even fosters and strengthens relationships. We want to eat in a way where we're not afraid of what we're eating, but we want to eat in a way that makes sure that we are getting the nutrients that we need, and that we are giving the right fuel to our body for it to perform as well as it can. So, how do we do that?
Such a good question, because I think so often we talk about these things and people think, oh, what you're saying is then we should only eat cakes and cookies, and that's not at all, what I'm saying. I'm a dietitian. I very much believe that food is important,
Hmm.
and as parents, um, it's our job. I think the best way to teach our children is through modeling and through experiences. And so, as a parent, I'm the one in charge of the shared with my partner, the one in charge of the grocery shopping and the cooking and the meal planning. That's an adult job, not a child job. And I work to have balanced meals, to offer a variety of foods, and that includes celebratory foods. That doesn't mean at every single meal I'm serving um, cookies,
Mm.
but it also doesn't mean at every single meal I'm serving kale, right? I'm serving a variety of foods. But the truth is, at every meal, there's a fruit or vegetable that I offer. And so through, hundreds of thousands of meals, children learn what a balanced meal looks like. Children learn what quote unquote healthy eating looks like. Um, and I don't believe that it helps to teach young children through words, this is healthy, this is unhealthy, because children are concrete thinkers when they're young. It's a very confusing thing, and they can, that fear can become very real. Mom's telling me cookies are bad, but she gives me a cookie when we in my lunch. That can be such a confusing, scary thing for a young child. And so um, I think it's through our example that we best teach kids how to eat.
With a lot of things, sometimes it's easier to think about the things that we should absolutely not do, right? Some mistakes that we constantly
Yeah.
make. And it's such the case with parenting or with even with education. Sometimes it's just easier to look at the things that we know are wrong. So, what are some of the common mistakes that you find that people make when they are feeding kids and modeling these behaviors for kids? Because I'm not just talking to parents. There's a lot of food that gets consumed in classrooms and after school programs, and there's a lot of talk about health and nutrition in those programs too. So what are some of the common mistakes kind of people make when it comes to feeding kids?
I think one of the biggest one is saying too much about the nutrition
Hmm.
content of the food. So saying, um, eat your carrots because they have beta carotene in it, and they'll make your eyes strong. Eyes, strong. And I don't think we need to be saying that to young children. I think we serve the carrots alongside the rest of the meal, and that children learn through that modeling and experience.
Hmm.
And by putting value of good and bad on our food, um, it can it can have consequences that we don't even think about. So it could be some children might feel pressured when we make these comments and are less likely to eat them because they feel pressured, or we might be creating fear and confusion because, oh my gosh, I don't like carrots. Am I going to go blind?
Hmm.
Um, and that's something that's not just a made up example. That's something that is seen clinically of children becoming fearful. Um, Nutrition is a very complex science that cannot be kind of just taught in these black and white, good and bad terms. So I always tell parents, let's say less rather than more.
Okay.
Let's that modeling. Um, Another one is, um, and all of these are a bit loaded, right? Because we've we all come from families, and these might be things that our parents did to us,
Right.
and we might do it to our kids or not. We might do the opposite, but we really encourage families not to pressure their kids to eat a certain amount, like clear your plate, or you have to eat your vegetables before you eat this. Again, um, because of that pressure, it is really shown it doesn't help a child eat better.
Right.
Putting a balanced meal in front of a child or having them make their plate and then allowing them to listen to their body really is what helps a child grow up to be an adult that's able to listen to what their body needs.
Okay, I'm gonna throw you a bit of a curveball here, and I
Do it.
apologize for that. But listening to our bodies, the the biggest complaint I'm getting from teachers and from the schools and districts that I work with is they're seeing an increasing number of kids that are dysregulated. And so we know that if we are dysregulated, if we're anxious, if we're feeling a lot of stress, our body might be telling us that we want food, right? We might be eating not because we need fuel and we're hungry for that fuel that our body needs to perform and get through the day and do all those activities that we enjoy, but we might be eating to as a way to regulate. Like how do you ever coach parents or teachers about telling the difference, or is that something that we should really kind of back away from?
Again, a really great question. I think being dysregulated for some people, eating does help them regulate,
Yeah.
or not eating. Right? There's other people that um, not eating, they feel more regulated. And so I think the question is, rather, instead of demonizing, I mean, it is a coping skill that works for some people,
Yeah.
right? So if you're a young child and you feel super dysregulated and you eat and you feel better, to think of it as it's one way for them to regulate. Can we offer other ways in schools
Mm,
for kids to regulate? And so if that's the concern, is that's the only option, instead of saying, well, we're not going to let the child eat, or we're going to teach them that that's bad to regulate with food, could we instead be putting short breaks in the day to regulate physically? Could we think of other things at the children's desks to regulate? So we're offering more options rather than saying this, eating when we're dysregulated is bad and we're not going to do that, because it is a possibility, and it's not a bad thing inherently.
right. I mean,
Yes.
it's only bad in that it doesn't actually take away the cause of the stress, right? So we think of it as I know that there's a big debate going on in academics about even whether to use a term like maladaptive, which we used to use. This is a maladaptive behavior, and there's a push towards, well, they work in the moment. So to call them maladaptive isn't exactly right, but they don't do anything to make that stress go away. Is I guess my point. And so I would say that in the example that you gave too, that takes a lot of observation on the part of a teacher. They got to look for when, and where are these habits occurring so that they can put those other things in place. But we know that being present is incredibly, incredibly important. Um, you've already kind of gone over some of these tips and tricks for getting the successful eating behaviors in kids. When you are going into and working with a family through your practice, when do you find that you are brought in versus when do you wish that they had reached out to you?
Wow, that's another good question. I love it. Um, so often I'm meeting with families when there's a crisis,
Mm,
when their child has developed an eating disorder, um, and um, things are dire,
right,
right? Everyone's very, very worried, um, and and sometimes that's um, because several years ago, maybe a medical provider said to a child, "You're gaining too much weight.
right.
You need to change how you eat." And that was a trigger for this child's eating disorder. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but that is something that we see sometimes. Um, in those situations, I would love to go back in time, and if there was a true dysregulation of a child's weight, um, for the parents to work with a dietitian of what might be happening, if to assess, was there really something going on, or was this typical growth, a child about to enter puberty? Um, and so, kind of, catching it on when there's those first concerns about, is there any change in a child's eating behavior that's problematic, whether it's a, a big change in eating more or eating less or cutting out certain foods.
In particular, on the eating less side, I would have to imagine that it's hard to recognize when there has been a shift in a destructive way, because as a society we are so obsessed with body size, right? And so I guess that I would have to imagine that there's a lot of families that that they thought, oh, they're slimming down. Maybe that's a natural part of adolescence. Maybe they are exercising more. It, is there? I mean, what are some of the hallmarks of a shift that is destructive versus a shift of in a kid in adolescence who is just wanting to take more care, for example, of their body?
Yeah. Well, in general, um, children, any kind of weight loss
Mm,
should be a red light of something to look at. I'm not saying that that means that there's a problem, but because children, especially during adolescence, are growing so quickly, if we are seeing this growth with weight loss, so literally the scale going down, that should be something that someone's alarmed by, which is so counter to the message of our society,
right.
right? That weight loss is good, or we should always be maintaining our weight and that type of thing. But children should be gaining weight. Now, a child might look as if they have, quote, slimmed down as they grow. Um, and I'm not saying that their body shouldn't change and look different, but just to kind of, if that's noticed, that would be something to look into and be curious what's going on. Also, if a parent's noticing a change in a child's eating behavior, so maybe suddenly they're cutting out entire food groups, or they're not eating with other people, they're declining social events that are around
Mm,
food. So, a kind of a change in their typical behavior. They're eating a lot quicker or a lot slower. You might see evidence of sneak eating, wrappers hidden somewhere, lots of food kind of disappearing, or you're not buying groceries as much. You're noticing, wow, I used to really be going through this food for lunches and now I'm not. So, kind of that change in behavior.
one of my favorite studies about children and families ever was the Columbia study on family mealtime. And and again, I have to confess my ignorance. When in the literature around body image and eating and even eating disorders, is there anything that suggests that more family meals together is has a role in creating kind of the optimum eating experiences for kids?
Yes, there. I mean, there is all sorts of research that really shows that the more family meals um, that are had,
Right.
someone's risk of disordered eating decreases. And so that family connection, that sharing meals together, everyone eating the same types of food, really seems to be a protective factor. Um, I feel like this topic for some parents can feel kind of like, wow, I can't do that for various
Mm,
reasons. Maybe I'm working at night. Maybe we are running to activities, during that time. And so I really encourage parents to think about this as okay, connection and not being afraid of food
yeah.
is what I think is important. That might be breakfast, that might be afternoon snack, that might be nighttime snack, that might be if a child needs to eat a dinner earlier because of an activity, can someone sit with them? And so really trying, this information I think is really important, but can it be used not in a way to make parents feel guilty, but in a way to, okay, what can I do to lean into this rather than just be like, well, I can't do that and throw up my hands kind of thing.
I have to imagine actually that in your practice, helping a parent make meals, make the meal experience and the eating experience about their kid instead of about them might actually have freed some parents from their own sort of internal script that is not very healthy. So the fact that, okay, now it's not about me, I'm doing this because I want this better thing for my kid, and they discover that in that shift they're able to do better for themselves as well. Have you noticed that, or am I just being too hopeful?
I think so. I think children can be, you know, very, very, can inspire us, right, to be the best selves that we are. And so, by if once it's if you want to get better or heal your relationship with food for your child, that can really be a motivating factor. And so, whether that's if I'm working with a family and I'm really noticing the parents' relationship with food is interfering with how they're feeding their child, the recommendation might be for them to see their own eating
Mm.
disorder dietitian or therapist so that they're working on that. Or maybe they don't have an eating disorder. Maybe it's kind of to your point, they're going to make a commitment to sit down at dinner time and eat with their family when maybe they were avoiding that.
Yeah.
And that could be healing for them, that could be healing for their child, and can kind of break that something that could be kind of a generational dieting pattern is really common in families where it's almost passed down, where a parent is dieting or restricting their eating. Um, and so I've seen that, which is really neat.
One of the more disturbing things that many of my guests, and not just talking about eating disorders, but we've had guests talking about the internet and social media, you know, is the is where we are getting information as a society. And so many of us are getting information from sources where their expertise is not guaranteed. So and we know that that's particularly true. The younger you are, the younger you are, the more likely you are to get your information from a TikTok or a social media influencer. So when a family or even when a kid is seeking out information, they know that they want to make a change, or they know that there is a better way to approach eating than what they have. What should they be looking for so they can avoid kind of this onslaught? I mean, it's if you type in diet or nutrition or any of these words that we've been talking about now in TikTok, it's a fire hose of information coming at you, and just a lot of it isn't good. So what should they be looking for? How should they know that the person that they are reaching out to for advice or for help knows how to actually provide it?
Well, in an ideal world, I would say look for someone who's a professional who is a registered dietitian, so has RD after their name.
Mm,
I mean, that would be great. Another thing to look out for is that when it comes down to it, nutrition is, like I said earlier, is really complex. So if you have someone you're watching that's making really black and white kind of all or nothing statements or promising drastic results, that's something to really stop and be like, this cannot be true, or what's best for my body. That's just not how our bodies work. That's not how food works. And so to notice that if you're like, wow, this person's promising this is going to happen in 2 days, or this person is saying this food is really really bad, or this food is really really good, that's just not how nutrition works. And so to be really wary of those messages.
I obviously I know that the confidentiality that you have with the people that with whom you work is very important. But given how entrenched some of these issues seem, what can you share like a success story with my audience? Something that you've managed, a family or even an individual that you've really managed to help get in control of their eating in the way that they wanted to, that worked for them and made a difference in their life.
Yeah, what I might do is kind of talk about it as, you know, um, a composite
Yeah.
of families I've worked with. I've done this work now. It's hard to say this, for over 20 years. um, and when I think about the families that I've helped, so often um, parents are coming saying, I'm really worried about my child. Maybe the child either has developed an eating disorder, or has been diagnosed with an eating disorder, or it hasn't been diagnosed yet. And the parents in this position of knowing this isn't best for their child, and wrestling with all these messages of what is healthy eating, how should I be feeding my child, and it can all just be so confusing. And so together, kind of working on um, knowing that helping your child eat enough, helping your child be relaxed about food, helping your child not be fearful of food. Um, those things have to be kind of at the base of all of nutrition before we even start talking about micronutrients or all the specifics of nutrition. We need to eat enough. We need to not be scared of food. We need to be relaxed. We need to be able to go out and see our friends and connect with people. And so when a family's able to really lean into that and themselves not be afraid of food and not be afraid of their child's body changing,
Mm.
and knowing that as a parent, it's not our job to control our children's weight. It's our job to take care of our children and provide them with healthy food. I'm going to use the H word, and model a healthy relationship with food. But at the end of the day, we cannot control our children's body size. And so when families can give that up and really focus on nurturing their child, um, I think they get to a place where they can worry less. Their child can recover from their eating disorder, and that feels good all around.
It seems that in this space, maybe more than other spaces that I've addressed about kids, more so than things like bullying, more so than academic performance, there are clear villains. So I've a couple, not to, I don't think she'd be embarrassed. Well, you can listen to the episode. Bryn Austin was just livid about diet supplements, right? This was something that she really saw as harmful to people. Is there, if you had a magic wand and you could make something, change something, maybe make it disappear, and that people would have better eating habits and better, more successful relationships with eating, what would you change?
Wow. So I'm going to have a really big magic wand, but what I would change is that our healthcare system is not weight centric.
Mm,
So the messages that our children get, when they go to the doctor about, um, so often they get these messages that their body is too big. Um, I just think has lasting impacts on young children. I want to be clear. Children need to be weighed and measured. We need to know they're growing. I'm not saying not to do that, but the direct messages of how much weight is entangled into our healthcare system when the research shows that it causes harm and that weight stigma causes harm and that there's this idea that everything can be solved by someone's weight changing, and I wish that could go away and we could focus on people's behaviors, um, and them taking care of themselves because I think that focus on weight interferes with us truly taking care of our bodies.
well, Anna, I want to thank you so much for being a guest today, and for really what is a lifetime of work on this issue. It's really impressive, and I want to just thank you for all the work that you've done too.
Thank you. I really appreciate you talking with me and having you on your podcast.
That was Anna Lutz. For more information about Anna, or about Lutz and Alexander Nutrition Therapy, or about Sunny Side Up Nutrition, or for additional eating disorder resources, visit talkingaboutkids.com. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.